I'm a search and rescue officer with the US Forest Service, and along the way, I've seen some things that I can't explain. Quick aside here, guys. Today's story follows 3 of OP's friends who he got the stories from over his training op, so we're going to be recalling not his stories today, but the stories of members of his unit. Let's hop right in. Katie is a vet who's been a search and rescue officer for about 15 years. She specializes in high elevation mountain rescues and is widely considered one of the best in her field. She was one of the more enthusiastic storytellers, and since we were together a fair amount during exercises, she ended up telling me about 4 that really stuck with me. Story 1. This first story she told me in response to my asking about her most traumatic calls. She just shook her head and told me that really bad calls happen more frequently on the mountain, since the potential for nasty accidents is far higher. About 5 years ago, one of the parks she worked at had a string of disappearances. It was a bad year, she said. One of the worst on record as far as weather went. They were getting about a foot of new snow every couple days, and there were a few avalanches that killed some climbers. They'd warned people about staying on the mapped areas, but of course, there's always those who don't listen. In one particularly nasty case, an entire family got wiped out because the father decided he knew better than the officials, and he took them out to an area that wasn't safe. They were snowshoeing, and as best as Katie could figure, they'd walked onto a shelf of snow that looked solid but actually wasn't. It gave way, and this family went ass over tea kettle almost 300 feet down a slope. They landed on rocks at the bottom, and the 2 parents died instantly, along with one of the kids. Of the 2 other kids that survived, one had a broken leg and fractured ribs, while the other was almost unharmed, besides some bruising and a sprained ankle. The uninjured child left his sibling behind and set out to find help. Katie said the kid didn't make it more than half a mile before the storm overtook him. Kid stopped to try and get warm or maybe just rest, and ended up freezing to death. They ended up finding the family with the help of some witnesses who saw them heading out into the wilderness, and she was the one who had to find the kid that ended up freezing to death. She said it had started to snow at this point, just enough to obscure long-distance vision, but not enough to make searching impossible. She saw a figure sitting in the snow up ahead, and she got to it as quickly as possible. She described, in detail, how, as she got closer, she realized first that it was a child, second that they were deceased, and third that they had frozen in one of the most pitiful positions she's ever found a corpse. The kid was sitting upright, with his knees tucked up against his chest. His arms were curled around them, and his head was tucked up in his coat. When she moved the coat to look at the face, she saw that he'd died crying. His face was twisted, and the tears were frozen on his cheeks. She said it was painfully obvious that the kid was terrified when he succumbed to hypothermia, and as a mother, it broke her heart. She told me repeatedly that she hopes the father is burning in hell as we speak. Story 2. The other story she told me that stood out was one that happened when she was a rookie. Her team got a report of an experienced climber who hadn't come home the previous day. His wife was convinced that something bad had happened because he'd never failed to come home on time. They went out looking for him, and had to climb what sounded like some very technically challenging parts of the mountain. They got to a relatively flat area, and Katie started seeing blood in the snow. She followed the trail, and as she went, she started seeing little bits of tissue. She wasn't sure exactly what body part it had come from, but the further she followed it, the more there was. She follows this blood and gore trail to a sheltered area under a cliff face, and she finds the climber. She said there was so much blood, more than she'd ever seen. He was lying face down, arms stretched in front of him, as if he died crawling. She looks closer and sees that he's been partially disemboweled, which is where the tissue she'd had seen was coming from. The guy had an ice pick tucked into a hip holster, and it's covered in blood. Of course, they'll never be exactly sure what happened, but she said best she can figure, the guy had been attempting to climb up to the next area and had been using his ice axe to ascend. He probably hit a loose patch and had fallen. On the way down, or possibly when he landed, he'd gotten impaled by the axe, and it disemboweled him. He drug himself along, tearing pieces of himself out as he went, and had died under that cliff face. Story 3. This one is from Katie's early days as a ranger. A family had been out berry picking in an area of the forest very close to the entrance of the park. They had 2 little boys, both under the age of 5, and at some point during the day, one of them vanishes. There's an absolutely massive search, and they find absolutely nothing. It's another one of those cases where it's like the kid was never there in the first place. The dogs just sit down and don't pick up on anything. No trace of the kid is found. The search goes on for about 2 months, but is eventually called off. Fast forward 6 months later, the family comes back to place flowers at a memorial that's been set up for the kid, and they brought their other son with them. While they're placing the flowers, they lose sight of the kid for about 3 seconds, and in that span of time, he vanishes into thin air. Now, obviously the parents are beyond devastated. It's awful enough to lose one child, but to lose two is beyond imagining. The search is huge, one of the largest in history. It attracted a fair amount of media attention, actually. There are about 300 volunteers combing every inch of this park, looking for the kid, but again, no trace. The search goes on for about a week, with people looking miles from the part of the park he vanished from, and then, almost 2 weeks later, a volunteer, about 15 miles from the designated search area, radios in that he found the kid. They assume the kid was dead, but the volunteer says he's not only alive, he's in good shape. Katie and her team go out to recover the kid, and when they get there, she can't believe that this kid that's been missing has clean clothes, no dirt on him anywhere, and he doesn't appear traumatized. The volunteer says he found this kid sitting on a log, playing with a little fistful of twigs that's bound together with some old rope. Katie asks him where he's been, who he was with for those 2 weeks, and the kid tells her that he's been with the Fuzzy Man. Now, Katie firmly believes in Bigfoot, so she gets all excited and asks what he means by fuzzy. Was he hairy? But the kid says, no, he wasn't hairy, he was a fuzzy man. And he describes a man that's blurry, like when you close your eyes, but not all the way. He says the man came out of the trees and took the kid with him deep into the woods. The kid says he slept in a hollow tree and the fuzzy man gave him berries to eat. Katie asks if this man was mean, if he scared the kid, and the kid says, no, he wasn't scary, but I didn't like how he didn't have eyes. They get this kid back to headquarters, and a cop takes him into town to talk to him more about what happened. Katie's friends with the cop that talked to him, and she says the kid described being kept in a tree by this fuzzy man and given berries whenever he was hungry. He was allowed to wander around a very specific clearing, but when he tried to go further, the fuzzy man would get mad and yell real loud, even though he didn't have a mouth. When the kid got scared at night, the fuzzy man made it go brighter and gave him the twig bundle. He said the fuzzy man was going to keep him, but he had to let him go because the kid wasn't the right kind. He either can't or won't elaborate more on that. The cops are just sort of left scratching their heads, and the search for his brother is renewed, with no results, sadly. The kid has no idea where his brother might be, and they never found him. Story 4. The last story Katie told me was something that happened when she got separated from her training group when she was just a rookie. They were learning the basics of high elevation belaying on a well-mapped side of the mountain, and she had to use the bathroom. She went off about 15 yards from the group during a meal break and did her business. And from this point, I'm going to tell it to you exactly how Katie told it to me. So I go to take a piss, and once I'm done, I start going back to the group. But I've only gotten about 5 feet when I realize that I have no idea where I am. And this wasn't an, oh, I got turned around kind of lost. I mean, I had literally no fucking clue where I was. If you asked me, I don't even think that I would have been able to tell you what state we were in. It was sort of how I imagine people with amnesia feel, you know? You're completely lost and you have no idea what to do or where to go. So I stood there for a while, just trying to figure out where I was and what I was supposed to be doing. But the longer I stood there, the more confused and turned around I get. So I start walking. As I recall, I just picked a random direction and went for it. And as I'm going along, it's just getting worse and worse to the point where I have no concept of why I'm on the mountain in the first place. I'm just trudging through the snow. And then I start hearing this voice. It's kind of inside my head. Almost like if a frog could talk, all low and croaky. It's telling me over and over that it's okay, you just need to find something to eat. Find something to eat and you'll be okay. Just keep walking and find something to eat. Eat. And I swear to God, I've never felt that hungry in my whole life. It was a bottomless sensation, and I think I'd have eaten just about anything you put in front of me right then. I had no concept of time either, so I have no idea how long I've been out there when I hear an actual voice coming towards me. I move towards what I hear and see one of the other search and rescue rangers. He looks fucking terrified. He's running towards me asking if I'm okay and what the hell I'm doing out here. And the scary thing was, As he's running towards me, I kind of see myself reaching into my belt for my hunting knife. I'm not really thinking about what I'm doing, I'm just thinking that I have to eat, and if I don't eat, I'll never be okay again. He sees me doing that and backs off right away. He yells at me to put my knife away and that he's gonna hurt me if I don't, and that kind of snaps me back. All of a sudden, I know exactly where I am, and I put my knife away. I run to him and ask him how long I've been gone, thinking he'll tell me I've been gone for maybe a half hour or so. But he tells me I've been gone for 2 whole fucking days. He said I'd gone over 2 peaks and ended up almost on the other side of the mountain. If I'd kept going, I would have ended up wandering into about 300 square miles of wilderness. They'd never have found me. He couldn't believe I wasn't dead, and of course, I don't know what the fuck to think. To me, no time had passed at all. I didn't have anything to say, so I just go back with him to the rendezvous point, and from there to HQ to be airlifted to the hospital. When I get there, they do all kinds of tests and try to figure out exactly what happened as best they can. From their guess, I had some kind of weird fugue state, which is kind of like amnesia or a seizure that knocked my brain out of whack. But the truth is that we really don't know. It's never happened again, but I'll tell you, ever since then, I never go out there alone. People rag on me for making them come with me when I have to leave the group, but I just tell them that listening to me piss in the snow is better than losing me for 2 entire days on a freezing mountain. For story 5, I talked to Eddie. Eddie's a former trainer who now works as an EMT. He still comes to ops and likes to help out, but doesn't work full-time for us anymore. He specializes in finding lost kids. He just seemed to have kind of a sixth sense when it came to knowing where they'd gone. He's a legend among the senior vets, but he gets embarrassed if you compliment him on his work. He sat down with me at dinner one evening, and we ended up swapping stories. Most of them were just casual, but when we got onto the subject of weirder calls, I mentioned that I had a buddy who'd gone up a set of stairs. When I said that, Eddie got kinda quiet, and asked me if I had heard of a little boy who disappeared from his park a few years back. I hadn't, so he told me this story. Story 5. They were out looking for this 11-year-old boy, Joey, who'd gone missing near a river. Of course, the first thought was that he'd fallen in and drowned, but when they brought dogs out, they led the officers away from the river and up into a very densely forested area. When we do searches, we search in a grid pattern, and we search every box of the grid incredibly thoroughly. What Eddie's team noticed right away was that a very strange pattern was emerging. Dogs were in alternating boxes and picking up Joey's scent, but then losing it when they overlapped with another box. If you think of a checkerboard, Joey's scent was being picked up in random black squares, but never in red. This, of course, didn't make any sense, because how could a kid bounce from area to area without leaving a scent in each place he passed? Eddie and his partner pass into a new box of the grid, and Eddie notices a set of stairs about 50 yards away. He tells his partner that they need to go check near it, but his partner flat out refuses. He tells Eddie that he's made it a point to never go near any stairs he sees. He tells Eddie that he'll wait while he checks. Eddie says that while he was irritated, he felt for the guy and didn't push him on the subject. He says, I walked over to the stairs. They were small, kind of like stairs into a basement. I don't really feel strongly one way or another about them, the stairs I mean, so I wasn't really scared. I guess I'm just like everyone else. I simply prefer not to think about them too much. Anyway, I went over and I could see that there was something lying on the bottom step, sort of curled up, and my heart sank, because of course you always hope for the best. And we were confident that we'd find this kid alive, because he'd only been missing for a few hours. But I knew right away that was him, and that he was dead. He was curled up into a ball on the bottom step, holding his stomach. It looked like he'd been in horrible pain when he died, but I didn't see any blood, except a little bit on his lips and chin. I radioed in that I'd found him, and we got his body back to command. That poor family, they were devastated. The parents couldn't understand how he'd been dead, because he'd only been gone for such a short amount of time. And on top of that, we didn't have any obvious cause of death, which just made it worse. I figured he'd probably eaten something poisonous since he was holding his stomach when I found him, but I didn't want to guess. It's hard enough to hear that your kid is dead, let alone to have some stupid search and rescue guy guessing about what happened. They took him away, and I went home and tried not to think about it. I hate finding dead kids, man. I loved this job, but It's one of the reasons I left. I've got 2 daughters, and the thought of losing them that way, just... At this point, Eddie was choking up a little bit. I'm not great with emotional stuff like that, and it's always sort of been awkward to see a grown man cry to me. So I didn't really know what to do. But he pulled himself together, and he kept going. He said, "We don't always hear back from the coroners about the cause of death. It's not really our job to know, I guess, and sometimes if they think it's foul play, they won't tell us because of legal bullshit. But I've got a friend who works for the sheriff's department, and he'll usually pass along any interesting info if I ask. In this case, though, I actually got a call from him about a week later. He asked if I remember the kid, and of course I did, and he says some seriously weird shit is going on. He tells me, 'Eddie man, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but the coroner has no idea what happened to this kid. He's never seen anything like it.' My friend goes on to tell me that when the coroner opened the kid up, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The kid's organs were like Swiss cheese, quarter-sized holes punched clean through just about every single organ the kid had, aside from his heart and his lungs. But his colon, his stomach, his kidneys, even one of his testicles, were full of these clean holes. My friend said the coroner described it as if someone had taken a hole punch and punched holes in everything. They were neat and orderly, but the kid didn't have a scratch on him, no entry or exit wounds. The closest anyone there had ever seen to something like this was a guy who'd filled himself full of buckshot one year while cleaning his rifle. No one had a clue what could have possibly caused it to this kid. My friend asked me if I'd ever heard anything like it, or if we'd had similar cases in the past, but I'd never even heard of something like that, and I told him that I wasn't going to be any help to him. As far as I know, the coroner determined the cause of death as something like massive internal bleeding, but no one knows what really happened. I've never been able to forget that kid. I have nightmares about it sometimes. I don't let my kids go into the woods alone because of stories like this, and when we go together, I never let them out of my sight. I used to love it out here, but that case and a couple others just sort of ruined it for me. Dinner was over, so we started to clean up and go back to our cabins. But before we went our separate ways, Eddie put his hand on my shoulder and looked at me and told me that there's bad things out here. Things that don't care if we have families or lives, or that we can think and feel. He tells me to be careful, and he walks away. I didn't get a chance to talk to him again after that, but the story stuck with me. Story 6 comes from Paulo, another vet who's been a search and rescue officer for years. We were partnered together on a grid sweep during a training exercise and chatting casually about how we liked the job, what kinds of things we'd seen, and the like. At one point, we passed an old set of stairs, though these were probably from an old fire lookout, given the area we were in. I sort of casually mentioned that I was curious about the stairs and that I wished I knew more about them. Again, just like Eddie, he got kind of quiet and looked like he wanted to tell me something, but he wasn't sure if he should. Finally, he told me to turn my radio off. Obviously, this is something we are never supposed to do, but I did, and he did the same. Story 6. About 7 years ago, he tells me, he was out in a call with a rookie. They were in an area of the park that's had a lot of strange reports and events, disappearances, stories about lights in the forest, odd noises, things like that. The rookie was totally spooked. Kept going on about things out in the woods. According to Paulo, the guy wouldn't stop talking about the goat man, just on and on, goat man this and goat man that. Finally, as Paulo recounts it, I told him there was plenty else to be afraid of out there that was very real, and that he'd better get over this goat man thing. The rookie wanted to know what kinds of things I was talking about, and I told him just to shut up and walk. We crested a little ridge and there was a staircase about 10 yards ahead. The rookie stops dead in his tracks and just stands there looking at him. I tell him, see, that's something you should be afraid of. The rookie asks me what the hell are these doing here? And for some reason I just open up and tell him the truth, or at least what I've been told is the truth. I could have gotten into a lot of trouble for doing what I did, and I could get in a lot of trouble for repeating it to you. So, I'll tell you what. Under the condition that you never breathe a word of this to the soups, I'll tell you what I know. Of course, I told him I wouldn't say a word, and then we both double-checked to make sure our radios are off. When I first started out, we were a little less tight-lipped about him, and other things that happened out here as well. We warned people before they were even hired that there was weird shit going on. I guess the Forest Service was tired of having such a massive turnover rate, and they wanted people to know what they were getting into. So they started having people sign these agreements that they wouldn't go to the media about what they were going to see. The Forest Service didn't want to scare people away, so last thing they needed were spooked rookies running off to the media with stories of ghosts and haunted stairs. But eventually, they found that the agreements weren't necessary. People not only didn't want to talk about what they saw, they wouldn't. A few times, media tried to talk to people when kids or hikers would disappear, and no one would say a word. I really can't explain it. I guess we just don't really want to admit that anything is wrong or that anything else could be out there. This is our job, to be out in the woods every single day. We don't need to be spooked. And the best way to avoid that is to pretend like everything's okay and nothing ever happened. So I'll tell you everything I can think of, and after that, I'm done talking about it for good, and I expect you to stop looking into this. The stairs have been around out here for a long time, as long as the parks have existed. We have records going back decades describing them. Sometimes people go up them, and nothing happens. Other times, and I really don't like talking about it, but sometimes really bad shit happens. I saw one guy get his hand sliced clean off when he got to the top step. He reached out to touch a tree branch, and it happened so fast. 1 second his hand was there, and the next it was gone. Completely clean wound. We didn't find his hand. The guy almost died. Another time, a woman touched one of the stairs and a blood vessel in her brain exploded. Literally just exploded like a water balloon. She didn't have an aneurysm, it just happened. She sort of stumbled down and came over to me, and all she got out was, "I think something's wrong with me." She dropped like a sack of flour, dead, before she hit the ground. I'll never forget the way the blood leaked into the inside of her eye before she died. I watched it turn red. I watched it happen, and there wasn't a single thing I could do. We warn people not to go anywhere near them, but there's always at least one idiot who does each year. And even if nothing happens to them, something bad always happens. Kids go missing as we're on their trail. Someone dies the next day, cut in half in a completely safe part of the park. I don't know why, but something bad always happens. I don't know exactly why they're out here. It doesn't matter. They're here. And if we're smart, we tell our new officers exactly what they're capable of. We were both quiet for a little while. I was afraid to talk because I wasn't sure if he was done. He looked like he wanted to say something else. And then, when he did finally speak up again, he said, "Have you ever noticed how you can't find the same ones twice?" I nodded, expecting him to continue, but he just stayed quiet, walking alongside me. And eventually he started a story about the biggest deer he'd ever seen in the park. I didn't bring up the subject again, and I didn't press him for any more stories. He dropped out of the op the next day. Apparently he left before the sun came up. He said he was sick. None of us have heard from him since he left. This has been part 4 of this 6-part series. I hope you all really enjoyed. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. It lets me know to keep making it. The comments have been awesome so far. The encouragement's been phenomenal. Like I said, I'm not really much of a storyteller, especially for horror stories. So to have people in the comments saying things like, "Hey, I love the ambient audio. Your voice is really good for this. This is one of my favorite series." Stuff like that, as a small YouTuber, really does it for me. And I really appreciate you guys for taking the time to let me know that you enjoyed what I do. That means a lot to me. But man, hearing the stories from the other side of things, not just OP's stories, that's wild. I mean, that kid with all the perforations in his organs? Jesus, I can't imagine how. I can't imagine how. The fuzzy man? God, I don't even think I want to know, frankly. And Katie's fugue state she went into? God, that's like stories you hear about people going just batshit insane and becoming murderous serial killer folk stories. I wonder if there's an actual report from the guy she was walking towards with her knife partially unsheathed. Like, I wonder if that man has this story and has told it to people. That would be crazy. I knew a guy who was part of the Secret Service, well into his retirement at this point, but all he does all day is just sit at his window and watch cars go by. I don't know what he was, some sort of like surveillance person, I don't know, but he can't talk anything about what he did before, not even to his wife. Now, I've never been one for conspiracy theories, but reading stories like this and hearing about similar things firsthand from people, it makes you wonder. It really makes you wonder, like, could there be some other outside force that is watching over us and kind of pulling strings, not directly in our lives, but from various occupations, from various things? Maybe the Fuzzy Man was some sort of new military technology that someone ran off with, maybe it was an old Nazi scientist, things of that nature, who knows? And it's just crazy to think about. But I'm ReddList. I hope you've enjoyed this video today. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more of this content. I hope you all have a good rest of your day or night, and I will see you next time. Sweet dreams.